Everything you think you know about death is a lie, a comforting story, one that makes life easier to navigate but blinds you to the truth. They told you death is the end, that your consciousness simply fades into nothingness. But that's the biggest deception of all. Death isn't the end, not even close, but a transition, a journey through realms more real than anything you've ever experienced. For thousands of years, ancient texts have warned us that what happens after death is not random. It's structured, predictable, and, for most, terrifying. And everything these texts described is now being confirmed by modern science. Your awareness doesn't just disappear. It moves, it transforms, and if you're not prepared, it can trap you in an endless cycle you didn't even know existed. But if you prepare, then death is not something to fear. It's something you can master. And there's a guide, a hidden blueprint that lays out exactly what happens when you die. It's not just philosophy, it's an instruction manual written for the living. The Tibetan Book of the Dead has been used for over 1,000 years to prepare the mind for the moment of death. It doesn't just describe the afterlife, it teaches you how to navigate it and how to escape the cycle of rebirth once and for all. The moment your heart stops beating, the illusion of reality shatters. Your body may be lifeless, but something remains. You. Not the version of you tied to a name, a job, or a history, but the raw, unfiltered awareness that has been buried beneath layers of conditioning your entire life. At this moment, everything you've ever believed about existence is ripped away, and you come face to face with something you were never prepared for: the truth. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this moment with eerie precision. They call it the Chikai Bardo, the first stage of death. Your body fails, but your consciousness doesn't vanish. Instead, you are confronted with the clear light, the purest, most infinite presence beyond all form and thought. It is the closest thing to ultimate reality you will ever experience. If you recognize it, if you surrender to it completely, you dissolve into the infinite. Liberation, the end of suffering, the breaking of the cycle. But almost no one does. The shock is too great, the mind too attached to everything it once knew. Fear takes over, confusion floods in, and before you even understand what's happening, you're pulled deeper. This is where most people go wrong. Death is not a passive experience. It is not something that simply happens to you. It is a process, and just like in life, how you react determines what happens next. If you let go, if you recognize the illusion for what it is, you are free. But if you cling, if you resist, you spiral downward into the next stage, the Chonyid Bardo, the realm of visions. This is where things get terrifying. What happens next is not some external judgment, not heaven or hell imposed by an outside force. What you experience is a direct projection of your own mind. Every fear, every desire, every suppressed emotion explodes into form. You will see radiant deities offering salvation and wrathful demons that will rip you apart. But here's the secret. They are the same thing. They are you. Every face you encounter, every monstrous being or celestial guide is a mirror of your own consciousness. If you understand this, if you remain fearless, you can still break free. But if you react with fear, if you mistake these visions for reality, you fall deeper, pulled toward the final stage, rebirth. And this is where it gets even more disturbing. The Sidpa Bardo, the last stage of death, is where the mind desperately searches for an escape. If you haven't broken free by this point, you will be drawn into a new existence, a new body, a new cycle of birth and death dictated entirely by the unresolved karma of your past life. Your attachments, your unfinished desires, your fears, they don't disappear. They follow you, pulling you into another incarnation, another life filled with the same struggles, the same suffering, the same ignorance, over and over. The truth is, most people don't escape. They don't even realize there's something to escape from. They die just as they lived, blind, controlled by the same illusions that shaped their waking life. Because the final secret of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is this: you are already in a bardo. These in-between states don't just happen after death. They happen constantly, in this life. Every moment of transition, every time you're caught between what was and what will be, you are stepping into a bardo. And if you can learn to navigate these transitions now, if you can become aware of how illusion controls you in life, you can prepare for death in a way that almost no one ever does. Some things go deeper than we can say here, but if you want to go further, we reveal hidden knowledge inside our free newsletter, Insights Academy. There are things we can't discuss on YouTube, but inside, you'll discover what's truly behind the veil. For a limited time, you'll also receive a free ebook copy of The Kybalion. Go to the link in the description now. The real question is, what will happen when it's your time? Will you recognize the illusion and free yourself, or will you fall back into the cycle? Because make no mistake, this isn't just about what happens when you die. It's about how you're living right now. The moment of death is not silent, it is not peaceful, nor is it chaotic in the way most people imagine. It is something entirely different, something so overwhelming that most people don't even realize it's happening. 1 second, you are in your body, and the next, everything you ever thought you were is stripped away. Your senses dissolve. The external world vanishes, but you are still there, floating in something incomprehensible. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this as the Chikhai Bardo, the first stage of the afterlife. It is here that you come face to face with the one thing no one has ever prepared you for, the clear light. For most, this moment is instant and terrifying. The clear light is not a tunnel, not a figure waiting to guide you home. It is raw, absolute reality. The mind, so used to defining itself through thoughts, emotions, and attachments, is suddenly confronted with something beyond form, beyond time, beyond identity. Imagine standing on the edge of existence itself, looking into infinity, and realizing that everything you ever thought was real was just a dream. This is the first test, the first chance for true freedom. If you recognize the clear light for what it is, if you surrender completely, you merge with it. Liberation, the end of suffering, the escape from the endless cycle of birth and death. The system collapses, and you step beyond it. But here is the brutal truth. Almost no one does. The shock is too great, the conditioning too deep. Instead of merging with the light, most people panic. The mind clings to the familiar, searching for something to hold on to, memories, emotions, even the pain of the body they just left behind. And in that moment of hesitation, the light fades. Confusion sets in, the mind recoils, and the journey continues. This is where everything goes wrong, because the moment you fail to recognize the clear light, you begin to fall, not physically, but psychologically. The mind, now untethered, does what it has always done. It creates. And what it creates next will determine what happens to you. This is the beginning of the second stage, the descent into visions and illusions. And this is where death begins to look a lot like a dream. Have you ever had a nightmare so vivid that in the moment you believed it was real? This is what happens next, but on an unimaginable scale. Everything you experience in this next phase, every face you see, every world that unfolds before you, is a manifestation of your own consciousness. And this is where most people become trapped, lost in the projections of their own mind, unable to tell what is real and what is illusion. There is no judge waiting for you, no divine hand to pull you into heaven or cast you into hell. What you experience in this next stage is determined entirely by the state of your mind at the moment of death. If you are at peace, the transition is smooth, effortless. If you are in fear, the descent begins. This is why the Tibetan Book of the Dead exists, not to comfort the dying, but to prepare them, to remind them in the most critical moment of existence that the clear light is not something to fear, but something to embrace. Because in the first few moments after death, there is still a chance to wake up, a chance to escape the cycle. But if you hesitate, if you let fear take over, the illusions will begin. And once they start, it is almost impossible to stop them. The mind, conditioned by a lifetime of beliefs, desires, and unresolved emotions will create entire realities, beautiful visions, horrific nightmares, realms of gods and demons. And the worst part? None of it is real. Yet, to the one experiencing it, it will feel more real than anything they have ever known. This is why understanding death now, while you are alive, is everything. Because the moment it happens, you will not have time to think. You will only have what you have already trained yourself to recognize. The people who achieve liberation are not the ones who beg for salvation in their final moments. They are the ones who, through awareness and preparation, meet death as an old friend, not as an enemy. They see the light, and instead of clinging to their old self, they dissolve into it without resistance. Most people will not do this. Most people will resist, and that is why most people will fall into the next stage. The Chikai Bardo is a door, and for the few who recognize it, it is the way out. But for the many who don't, it is only the beginning of something far more overwhelming. Because after the light fades, the next phase begins, and what you will experience next is entirely up to you. The light has faded. The opportunity for instant liberation is gone, and now you are somewhere else, somewhere unfamiliar, yet strangely personal. This is the second stage of death, the Chonyid Bardo, the realm of visions, and for most, this is where the real struggle begins. Everything that happens next is not random. There is no external judge, no divine being deciding your fate. What you see now is a direct reflection of your own consciousness. Every fear, every attachment, every belief you carried in life manifests around you, shaping what you will experience next. And this is where most people become trapped. At first, the visions may seem beautiful. Dazzling lights, celestial beings, radiant deities offering guidance. You feel a deep sense of peace, as if you are being welcomed home. But here's the truth, no one tells you. These visions, as beautiful as they are still an illusion. They are the projections of your own mind, the echoes of everything you once desired. And if you don't recognize this, if you mistake them for reality, you will become attached. You will reach for them, cling to them, and in that moment, the cycle tightens its grip. You will begin to descend. Then, the visions start to change. The light dims, the beauty twists into something darker. Suddenly, the radiant figures shift into terrifying forms, wrathful deities with monstrous faces, demons with burning eyes, chaotic, overwhelming energy that fills you with fear. This is where most people panic, desperately trying to escape what feels like an emerging nightmare. But here's what no one understands. These demons are not external. They are not here to punish you. They are you. Every suppressed emotion, every ignored fear, every piece of your psyche you refuse to acknowledge in life now appears before you, fully formed, impossible to ignore. The Tibetan masters knew this truth centuries ago. The deities and the demons are the same. The only difference is how you perceive them. If you recognize them for what they are, if you remain calm, if you do not react in fear, you will pass through them. The illusions will dissolve, and you will move closer to liberation. But almost no one does, because fear takes over. And the moment you react to these visions as if they are real, as if they have power over you, you are caught. The mind recoils, the panic builds, and you are dragged deeper. The cycle strengthens, and the illusions tighten their grip. The most terrifying thing about this stage of death is that it does not feel like a hallucination. It feels more real than anything you have ever known. The mind, desperate for meaning, tries to anchor itself to something familiar. This is why religious figures, ancestral spirits, and past memories may appear in this phase. Not because they are actually there, but because the mind clings to whatever it knows, whatever it believes, whatever it has been conditioned to expect. And this is where many lose their way. Think about it. If you have spent your entire life believing in a particular version of the afterlife, why would your mind abandon that belief in death? If you believed in heaven, your mind may create one. If you feared hell, That fear may manifest into something inescapable. The mind is infinitely powerful, and when it is unchained from the body, it does what it has always done. It constructs reality. But in death, there is no external world, no solid ground, no physical body to anchor you. There is only the mind. And the problem is, most people never train themselves to control it. The terrifying deities are not here to torture you. They are here to wake you up. But most people do not wake up. They try to run. And where do they run? Deeper into the Bardo, deeper into the illusions, deeper into a cycle they no longer realize is consuming them. This is how the descent into rebirth begins. It does not happen all at once. It happens in stages, one reaction at a time, until the mind has fully identified with the illusion and forgotten that it ever had a choice. This is why preparation for death does not start at the moment of dying. It starts now, because in those crucial moments, you will not have time to learn. You will only have what you have already practiced. If you spent your life running from fear, avoiding your shadow, distracting yourself from the deeper questions, then when this moment comes, you will fall into the illusions without even realizing it. But if you spent your life confronting your fears, mastering your mind, learning to see through illusion, then in this moment you will not be fooled. You will recognize the visions for what they are: manifestations, projections, impermanent, powerless, and you will move past them, untouched. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was not written for the dead. It was written for the living, so that when this moment comes, you will already know what to do. But most people will never read it, never prepare, never understand. They will meet death the same way they met life, unaware, unprepared, caught in the illusions of their own mind. And for them, the journey will continue. Because beyond the Bardo of visions lies something even more inescapable, the final stage. The moment where the mind, desperate for form, reaches for a new existence. The moment where the cycle of rebirth pulls you back in. And if you haven't mastered your mind by then, it will be too late. The illusions have taken hold. The radiant figures have faded. The terrifying deities have played their part. And yet, you remain. You have not awakened. You have not dissolved into the clear light. You have not escaped. Now you are being pulled into the final stage of death, the Sidpa Bardo, the place where choices vanish and the cycle begins again. The moment where, unless you wake up now, you will be thrown back into the endless wheel of birth, suffering, and death. By this stage, the mind is fully immersed in illusion. You are no longer just witnessing your subconscious unfold. You are part of it. You feel like you have a body again, even though you don't. You feel desire, fear, longing, as if you are still human, still yourself. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this stage as the moment when consciousness, desperate for stability, begins searching for a new form. It looks for something to attach to, something to anchor itself to, anything that feels familiar. This is the pull of karma. This is why you will be reborn. Rebirth is not a choice. It is not something you decide after weighing your options. It is a force, a gravity pulling you forward. Every action, every emotion, every attachment you carried in life has created momentum. And now that momentum decides what happens next. The life you lived has left a mark, an imprint on your consciousness. And that imprint is now dragging you into a new existence, a new identity, a new cycle. And the worst part, you won't even remember this moment. You won't remember the illusions, the beings, the suffering, the opportunity you had to escape. The second you step into your next life, everything resets. The mind wipes itself clean, and you start again, as if none of this ever happened. But it did. It always does. Because this isn't the first time you've died. This isn't the first time you've passed through the Bardos. You have done this countless times before. You have lived, died, and been reborn in an infinite cycle, stretching back beyond anything you can comprehend. And yet, here you are again, on the edge of being pulled back into the same game. Most never escape because they never even realize they are trapped. The Tibetan masters taught that in this stage, the visions shift again. You are no longer seeing deities or demons, you are seeing doorways, portals into new existences, into new parents, new worlds, new identities. These are the pathways into reincarnation, and at this moment, your consciousness will be drawn to one of them. The force of your unresolved emotions, your desires, your attachments, all of it will dictate which doorway you enter. If you lived with anger, you may be drawn to a life filled with suffering and conflict. If you lived with ignorance, you may be born into a life where truth is hidden from you. If you lived with greed, you may find yourself trapped in an existence where you are always wanting, always needing, never satisfied. Every action in life is a seed, and in this moment, you are being planted into the soil of your next existence. There is no external God placing you into a new life, no cosmic judge assigning you a fate. It is you. You are the architect of your own prison. And unless you recognize this, unless you break free now, you will walk through one of these doorways and forget it all. You will cry your first breath as a newborn, clueless that you have walked this path before. You will grow, struggle, suffer and die, only to be here again, watching this moment play out like a loop that never ends. But there is still a way out. Even here, at the very end, there is still a chance. If you have the awareness, if you remember, if you recognize the process for what it is, you can stop it. The Tibetan teachings describe a rare opportunity, a final moment where you can wake up and reject the pull of reincarnation. It is not easy. It requires complete detachment, total surrender. You must see through the illusion, through the pull of karma, and let go completely. Not just of life, not just of identity, but of the very idea of self. If you do this, you will not be reborn. You will break free, but almost no one does. The pull is too strong, the attachments too deep. The doors appear, and the mind reaches for them, desperate for something to hold on to. And just like that, the cycle begins again. The illusion resets, the prison door closes, another life starts, and another, and another. This is the greatest trick of all, not that death is final, but that it is endless, that most people will live and die 1,000 times without ever realizing they were trapped. And now, as you hear this, you have to ask yourself, will you be one of them? Or will you be the one who wakes up before it's too late? Because if you don't, you already know what happens next. You've lived it before. You will live it again, unless you finally decide to stop. You don't have to wait until death to enter a Bardo. You are in one right now. Every moment of uncertainty, every time your life shifts from one phase to another, every time you find yourself lost between the past and the future, you are experiencing the exact same transitions that occur after death. The only difference is that, in life, you are given the illusion of control. You believe you are making choices, shaping your path, deciding where you go next. But what if that too is an illusion? What if, just like in death, you are being pulled forward by unseen forces, by the weight of your past actions, by the attachments you refuse to let go of, by the same cycle that has dictated every incarnation you have ever lived? The Tibetan Book of the Dead doesn't just describe what happens after you die. It describes what is happening to you right now. The Bardos are not some distant metaphysical states reserved for the afterlife. They are playing out in every transition you go through. The moment you leave one stage of life and step into another, you enter a Bardo, childhood to adolescence, adolescence to adulthood, comfort to crisis, stability to chaos. Every change, every loss, every major transformation is a death of its own. And just like in the afterlife, how you navigate these moments determines where you end up next. Think about the times in your life when everything you knew suddenly dissolved. A breakup, the loss of a loved one, the moment when the path you thought you were on was ripped away from you without warning. Those were Bardos. You felt untethered, lost, searching for meaning. And what did you do? Did you recognize it for what it was? Or did you scramble to grab onto whatever felt familiar, whatever felt safe, even if it was just another illusion? That reaction, that desperate clinging, is the exact same mistake people make in the afterlife. They see the clear light, and instead of surrendering, they hesitate. They see the illusions, and instead of recognizing them as projections, they panic. They feel themselves being pulled into a new existence, and instead of resisting, they submit. And that is exactly what happens in life. You enter these transitional spaces with a chance to wake up, to break free, to reshape your reality. But instead of taking that opportunity, you follow the same patterns. You reach for distractions, for old comforts, for something to fill the void of the unknown. You convince yourself that if you can just return to what was, if you can just stabilize, everything will be okay. But that's not how Bardos work. Bardos are not meant to return you to the past. They are meant to transform you. And if you do not understand that, you will remain stuck, living the same cycles over and over, repeating the same patterns, trapped in an existence that feels eerily familiar, but never truly free. The truth is, most people never escape their personal Bardos. They die within them, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They go through life unconscious, reacting instead of creating, stumbling through transition after transition without ever realizing they had a choice. And the terrifying part, if you don't wake up to this process while you're alive, you will be just as blind when you die. You will experience death the same way you experience life, reactively, unconsciously, following the same karmic momentum that has dictated your every decision. This is why the Tibetan Book of the Dead is not a religious text. It is a survival guide, a manual for the most important journey you will ever take. And yet, almost no one reads it. Instead, people spend their lives preparing for things that don't matter, chasing money, status, comfort, while ignoring the one thing they are guaranteed to face. The irony is staggering. We act as if death is some distant event, something that happens at the end when in reality, we are dying every day. Every breath is a step closer. Every passing moment is another chance lost. And yet we pretend we have all the time in the world. But here's the real secret. You don't have to wait until death to prepare for death. You don't have to be on your deathbed to face what's coming. You can start now. You can train yourself to recognize the Bardos of life, to see through the illusions, to master your mind before it's too late. Because if you can do it now, in life, you will have the awareness to do it in death. And that is what separates those who break free from those who repeat the cycle. That is what determines whether you escape or whether you will be reborn once again, trapped in another existence you don't even remember choosing. So look around. Look at your life, at the transitions you are in right now. Are you seeing them clearly? Or are you running from them? Are you using this moment to wake up? Or are you just trying to survive until things feel normal again? Because if you are waiting for normal, you are already lost. There is no normal. There never was. There is only the illusion of stability, and once you see that, once you recognize that life itself is one long bardo, you will finally understand what death really is. And once you understand that, you will never live the same way again. For centuries, the Tibetan masters spoke of the Bardos, of consciousness continuing after death, of visions and transitions beyond the physical body. But now, modern science is beginning to catch up. The more we study consciousness, the more we realize something unsettling. Everything we've been told about death is incomplete at best and completely wrong at worst. The idea that your awareness simply vanishes when your body shuts down is based on an assumption, not evidence. And when you start looking at the research, the parallels between ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science are undeniable. The first crack in the mainstream view of death comes from near-death experiences. People who have clinically died and been revived describe the same things over and over again, floating outside their body, watching the doctors try to bring them back, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace, seeing a bright, indescribable light. Some report encountering beings of light, feeling a sudden flood of knowledge, or even reliving their entire life in a matter of seconds. And here's where it gets strange. These experiences are not random. They follow a pattern, one that closely mirrors the Tibetan teachings about the moment of death. In near-death experiences, those who remain calm, who surrender to the process, often describe a feeling of expansion, of dissolving into something greater, of moving beyond time and space itself. Those who panic, who fight against what is happening, are often thrown into terrifying, chaotic experiences, hallucinations, confusion, darkness. This aligns perfectly with the Tibetan description of the Chikai Bardo. The clear light appears, and if you recognize it, you are liberated. If you don't, you fall deeper. Science, without realizing it, is confirming what the mystics have known for over 1,000 years. But near-death experiences are just the beginning. In recent years, research into psychedelics has provided even more insights. Compounds like DMT, psilocybin, and ketamine have been shown to induce states of consciousness almost identical to what is described in the Bardo Thoth. People who take these substances often report seeing divine beings, traveling through dimensions, experiencing ego death, and entering vast, indescribable realms of existence. What's even more fascinating? These experiences often involve seeing the light, just like near-death experiences. And just like the Bardos, the experience is shaped by the person's own mind. Those who resist the process experience fear and darkness. Those who surrender find peace, clarity, and sometimes even a sense of enlightenment. But what does this mean? Could it be that death is not the end, but a shift in perception? A movement into a different frequency of existence? Some researchers in quantum physics are beginning to suggest just that. The idea that consciousness is purely a byproduct of the brain is being challenged. There are experiments suggesting that consciousness is non-local, that it exists beyond the physical structure of the brain, that it interacts with reality in ways we don't fully understand. Some physicists are even exploring the possibility that our consciousness exists in a quantum field, meaning that when the body dies, awareness does not simply disappear. It moves, it transitions, it continues, and yet, despite all this evidence, the mainstream narrative remains the same. Death is final. Consciousness is an illusion. Anything that suggests otherwise is dismissed as pseudoscience, despite the fact that every field, from neuroscience to quantum mechanics to psychology, is starting to point in the same direction. The real question is, why? Why are we so resistant to the idea that consciousness is bigger than the brain, that death might not be the end? The answer is simple: control. If you knew without a doubt that death was not the end, that consciousness was not bound to this life, how differently would you live? Would you still be afraid? Would you still conform? Would you still obey the systems designed to keep you small? Or would you wake up and start living as if nothing could truly destroy you? This is why the Tibetan teachings are dangerous. They don't just describe what happens after death. They expose the illusion of life itself. They tell you that everything you think is real is a projection, that your fears, your limitations, your very identity are just temporary states of mind. And now, science is beginning to back that up. The studies on near-death experiences, psychedelic consciousness, and quantum awareness are all leading to one unsettling conclusion. Death is not what we think it is. And if that's true, then everything we believe about life needs to be questioned. The people who experience near-death states and come back often say the same thing. They no longer fear death. They see the world differently. They understand that this reality, the one we are all clinging to, is just one layer of something much larger. And that's the real lesson here. The purpose of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is not just to prepare you for death, but to make you realize that you are already in a dream, that everything you experience is shaped by your own consciousness, that the way you react to life's transitions is the same way you will react to death, that if you want to be free, you have to wake up before it's too late. Modern science is just beginning to scratch the surface of what the ancient mystics already understood. But you don't need to wait for a laboratory to confirm what you can already feel deep inside. You already know that life is more than just material existence. You already know that your awareness is not confined to your brain. You already know that there is something beyond the physical world. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Will you push it away, pretend it doesn't matter, keep living as if this life is all there is? Or will you use it? Will you take it as the wake-up call it was meant to be? Because if you understand what death really is, you will never see life the same way again. If everything you've heard so far is true, then the way you live your life right now is shaping what will happen when you die. Every decision, every habit, every thought is reinforcing a pattern, one that will either trap you in another cycle of existence or free you from it altogether. And if death is a test, a transition, a moment where you either wake up or fall deeper into illusion, then the only way to pass that test is to prepare while you are still alive. The biggest mistake people make is thinking they can just figure it out when the time comes, that they'll suddenly gain wisdom, clarity, or enlightenment in their final moments. But if you've spent your entire life avoiding hard truths, distracting yourself, running from discomfort, then what makes you think you'll respond any differently when you die? Death is not a separate experience from life. It is an extension of it. And the way you navigate death will be no different from the way you navigate change, loss, and uncertainty right now. So how do you prepare? How do you train yourself to face the clear light without fear, to move through the Bardo of visions without being trapped, to resist the pull of rebirth when the time comes? It starts with mastering your own mind. The Tibetan masters understood that the ability to see through illusions in death is built by learning to see through illusions in life. This is why meditation was not just a spiritual practice for them, it was survival training. It was preparation for the moment when everything you've ever known is ripped away. Because at that moment, the only thing that will determine what happens next is your level of awareness. The first step is learning to recognize illusion. In life, just like in the Bardos, you are constantly being presented with distractions, emotions, desires that pull you away from clarity. Every day, you are bombarded with thoughts, stories, fears that demand your attention, that make you react, that make you identify with them. But if you train yourself to see them for what they are, temporary, fleeting, impermanent, you will not be caught in them when they appear in death. Every time you practice stepping back from your emotions, from your thoughts, from the stories in your mind, you are practicing for the ultimate test. The second step is letting go. The hardest thing about the Bardos is that they force you to surrender everything you have ever known. Your identity, your memories, your attachments, none of it will matter when you die. And the more attached you are to these things, the harder it will be to pass through the transition. If you cling to your identity, you will fear losing it. If you cling to your past, you will be pulled back into it. If you cling to fear, that fear will become your reality. The only way to escape is to start letting go now. Not just physically, but mentally. Learning to release control, to trust the process, to surrender to the unknown without resistance. The third step is awareness. Most people live in a constant state of unconsciousness, reacting to life instead of experiencing it fully. But when you start to cultivate awareness, when you start to observe your own mind rather than being consumed by it, you are training yourself for what comes next. Because in the Bardos, the one who observes is the one who escapes. The one who gets caught up in the illusions is the one who stays trapped. If you can watch your own thoughts, your own fears, your own reactions in life, you will have the ability to watch them in death. And that awareness will be the key to liberation. But here's the real secret. This is not just about preparing for death. It's about transforming the way you live. Because the more you train yourself to see through illusion, to let go, to remain aware, the more free you become in this life. The things that used to control you, fear, stress, desire, lose their power. The suffering that once seemed unavoidable becomes optional. You begin to navigate life with a kind of clarity that most people never experience. And when the time comes to leave this body, you won't be caught off guard. You will recognize what is happening. You will remember what you have trained for. And instead of falling into fear, into panic, into another cycle of existence, you will see the truth. This is what the Tibetan Book of the Dead was trying to tell us all along. That death is not something to be feared, but something to be mastered. That the only reason it seems terrifying is because we are unprepared. That the only thing separating those who wake up from those who get lost is whether or not they trained for the moment. Most people will never do this work. They will ignore it, dismiss it, convince themselves they don't need it. And when death comes, they will have no choice but to go wherever their mind pulls them. But you have a choice. You are hearing this now, which means you can decide to prepare. You can start training your mind, start breaking free from the illusions, and start stepping into awareness now, before it's too late. Because when the moment comes, you won't get another chance. You won't be able to go back. You will either be ready or you won't. And the decision you make today will determine which path you take. Most people will never wake up. Not in life, not in death. They will continue repeating the same patterns, falling into the same traps, living and dying without ever realizing they were trapped in the first place. That's the cycle. That's how the system works. It doesn't need to imprison you physically. It only needs to keep your mind blind enough that you never question the illusion. And that's exactly what happens in the Bardos. You enter death as unconsciously as you entered life, reacting instead of realizing, running instead of recognizing. And before you even understand what's happening, you are pulled back in. A new life, a new identity, another round of the same game. But what if you could stop it? What if you could break free? That is what this knowledge is really about. Not just knowing what happens after death, but knowing how to use that knowledge to change everything. Because if you can wake up here in this life, then when the moment comes, you won't hesitate. You won't fall for the illusions. You will see them for what they are, and you will step beyond them. That is the difference between those who are free and those who stay trapped. Awareness. But awareness is not something that just happens. It is something you cultivate. The Tibetan masters knew that preparing for death was not about rituals, beliefs, or faith. It was about direct experience. They spent their lives training their minds, facing their fears, stripping away everything false so that when death arrived, they would recognize it. And when they did, they passed through it as easily as stepping through a doorway. But most people are not like this. Most people resist, deny, pretend death isn't coming. And when it does, they react with fear. That fear is what drags them down. That fear is what keeps them stuck. That fear is why they never escape. But here is the truth. The same illusions that control you in death are controlling you now. The same fear that keeps you trapped in the Bardos is keeping you trapped in life. The distractions, the attachments, the mind's endless need to hold on to something, to be entertained, to feel important, to chase things that don't matter. These are the chains. And unless you break them now, they will still be there when you die, pulling you back into the cycle. The real work of escaping the Bardos does not begin at death. It begins in life. Start by asking yourself, how much of your life is controlled by unconscious patterns? How many of your choices are truly your own? Every day you wake up and step into a world that tells you who to be, what to value, what to fear. But whose thoughts are those? Whose beliefs are you carrying? How much of what you think you know is just another illusion, another trap? If you don't question it now, you won't question it in death. And if you can't wake up from this illusion, how will you ever wake up from the next? Most people live as if they have endless time. They push away the uncomfortable questions, drown themselves in distractions, convince themselves they will deal with death when it comes. But when it comes, it will be too late. You will not have time to learn. You will not have time to prepare. You will only have what you have already cultivated. If you have spent your life running, you will keep running. If you have spent your life afraid, you will stay afraid. And if you have spent your life unconscious, You will move into death just as unconscious as you were in life. But it doesn't have to be this way. That's the whole point of these teachings. They are not here to give you theories or comfort. They are here to shake you awake. Because if you wake up now in this life, then death loses its power over you. The moment you see through the illusion, the moment you stop reacting and start recognizing, you take back control. You break the cycle. And when you die, you will know exactly what is happening. The light will appear, and instead of hesitating, instead of clinging, instead of falling, you will let go. And in that letting go, you will finally be free. Most will never get this chance. They will ignore it, deny it, pretend it doesn't matter. And when the moment comes, they will fall back into the cycle, just like they always have. But you have heard this now, and that means you have a choice. You can keep living the way you always have, or you can start preparing. You can let fear dictate your life, or you can start stripping it away. You can fall back into illusion, or you can wake up. But whatever you do, understand this. When the moment comes, you won't be able to go back. You will either be ready, or you won't. And the decision you make today will determine which path you take. Some things are too deep to fully explain here, but if you want to go even further, we share knowledge in our free newsletter, Insights Academy. There are truths we can't discuss openly, but inside you'll find the knowledge they don't want you to have. And for a limited time, you'll also receive a free ebook copy of the Kybalion. Go to the link in the description now, because when death comes, you will either wake up or you will fall back into the dream. The question is, will you be ready? Everything you've ever feared about death is a lie. Not because death doesn't happen, but because you were never truly alive to begin with. You have spent your entire existence believing you are a body, a name, a collection of memories and experiences moving towards some inevitable end. But that was the first illusion. The deeper truth is this. What you think of as you is nothing more than a temporary mask, a flicker of awareness passing through a dream, mistaking itself for something solid. And just like any dream, one day it will dissolve. But what happens after that, what happens when the mask drops, depends entirely on whether or not you wake up before it's too late. This is what no one tells you. Death is not something that happens to you. It is not an event, not an ending, not a punishment or a release. It is a transition, a shift in perception. And the only reason it feels terrifying is because you have spent your life attached to an identity that was never real in the first place. You have believed in the illusion of self, in the illusion of permanence, in the illusion that what you see, hear, touch, and think defines you. But when death comes, it does not take you away. It simply reveals what was always there. The question is, will you recognize it, or will you resist, as most do, and be pulled back into another cycle, another life, another story, never realizing you were dreaming the whole time? The Tibetan masters understood this. That's why they wrote the Book of the Dead, not to comfort you, not to give you poetic ideas about the afterlife, but to prepare you for the one moment that truly matters. The moment when you are stripped of every illusion and forced to face yourself as you really are. For those who have trained, who have seen through the deception while they were still alive, that moment is liberation. For everyone else, it is a nightmare, a spiral of confusion, panic, and desperate grasping for something, anything, to hold on to. But by then, it is already too late. Most will never escape. They will live in fear of death, denying it, ignoring it, pretending it is some far-off event that will never truly come. And then, when it does, they will enter it just as they lived, unprepared, unaware, lost in the same illusions that controlled them in life. They will fall into the Bardos without recognizing them, react to the visions instead of seeing through them, and be pulled back into another existence just as they always have been. But you don't have to be one of them, because now you know. Now you see the truth for what it is. You are not just a body. You are not just a name. You are not just a collection of thoughts passing through awareness. You are the awareness itself, the thing that watches, the thing that experiences, the thing that has existed before and will exist after this life. And once you recognize that, truly recognize it, then death loses its power over you, because you understand that what dies was never real to begin with. This is the final test, the final realization, the thing that separates those who break free from those who stay trapped. The illusion is strong, and most will never see through it. They will live their lives playing a role, never realizing they are not the character, but the awareness behind it. But when the final moment comes, everything false will be stripped away, and the only thing that remains will be the truth. Will you recognize it, or will you turn away, cling to the illusion, and fall back into another life, another body, another identity, never realizing you had a choice? You have spent this life building an identity, a story, a collection of beliefs about who you are, but none of it will follow you. None of it will save you. The only thing that will matter in that moment is whether or not you see through it, whether or not you realize that you were never the story, you were the one watching it unfold. If you understand that, if you wake up to that truth now, then death is nothing to fear. It is nothing more than the end of an illusion. But if you are not ready, if you have not prepared, then when the moment comes, you will do what you have always done. You will cling, you will grasp, you will fear. And in that grasping, you will fall. You will follow the same patterns, the same instincts, the same karmic forces that have shaped every lifetime before this one, and the cycle will begin again. That is the real danger. Not that you will die, but that you will wake up in another life, unaware that you have lived this moment before, that you will be reborn into another dream, with no memory of the fact that you have played this game before, over and over again. And unless you wake up now, unless you see through the illusion before it's too late, you will repeat it forever. This is the choice in front of you. You can keep living the way you always have, letting fear control you, pretending death is some distant event that does not concern you. Or you can start preparing. You can start breaking free from the illusions, from the conditioning, from the patterns that have kept you asleep for lifetimes. You can start seeing through the deception now, while you still have the chance. Because when the moment comes, you will not have time to learn. You will only have what you have already cultivated. Most people will never take this step. They will hear this, agree with it, maybe even be fascinated by it, and then go right back to living as if they never heard it at all. They will get lost in distractions, in petty fears, in meaningless pursuits. And when the time comes, they will be just as unprepared as if they had never known the truth in the first place. But you are different. You have made it this far, and that means something. It means you are ready, ready to question everything, ready to stop living in fear, ready to wake up, not just in death, but in life. Because if you can wake up now, you can wake up when it truly matters. And if you can do that, you can break the cycle forever. The time to prepare is now, not later, not someday, not when it's convenient. Now, because this life is a dream. And one day, whether you are ready or not, you will wake up. The only question is, will you realize it before it's too late? If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it,"